All right, everybody. Welcome, everyone, to this week's Griscom stream. Happy to be here with all of y'all. We got some good news this stream. Really excited to break some of that down with all of y'all. But as always, feel free to jump in the chat, ask us questions. I'm always happy to hear from y'all. These are really helpful, honestly, hearing what everybody's sort of been thinking about. And is considering. There's a hell of a lot to get to, so let's get right to it. We got some exciting news to start with, y'all. Some really damn exciting news. Literally, right as I was about to go live, I got a message from our good friend Nick Bolin, who's going to be joining us tomorrow. We recorded the interview yesterday afternoon to talk about Denver, Colorado, and the Starbucks union movement that's been going on there. It's a really fascinating story that touches on a lot of things that affect both people, particularly in Colorado itself, but also nationally. We got some really damn good news right now, right before we went live. So let me see if I can share that with y'all right quick. This is literally breaking. Nick Bolin. A few minutes ago, a group of Denver Starbucks workers unanimously voted to unionize with Starbucks Workers United. I reported on their ongoing campaign and the anti-labor tactics they endured for the Guardian US. They sent me this picture after the vote tally was announced. Just truly beautiful and a really heroic movement from them. We're going to break down the specific context that they went through to get this successful result. But for now, it's worth celebrating because this news is so welcome. And as I say every time, we're live now when it comes to the Starbucks unionizing story. Very likely that there's one going on around you in your community. So find ways to come out and show your support, because that really does mean a lot to people, as Starbucks is sending some really nasty folks to people's workplaces, basically trying to threaten them, oftentimes veiled illegal threats. And it means a lot for folks when they know the community's got their back. So that's a beautiful story. Congrats to everybody in Denver, and thanks to Nick Bolin for covering this story. So we're going to be talking about that a lot more with him, along with some stories from the from Colorado's actually very interesting labor history, which is oftentimes sort of ignored or forgotten. So really looking forward to all of that. But as always, for people who just joined us, feel free to jump in, ask us questions in the chat. I'll be watching it. I don't know if y'all got a chance to catch it, but yesterday I was on Ben Burgess's show with Jason Miles, Bronco Marchetich, the rest of the great crew at Give Them an Argument, breaking down, taking some questions live. So it was a lot of fun. It's always great to hang out with those guys. And Lord, what else? We got just announcement wise, like tomorrow we got Nick Bolin on the show. We got some really cool things lined up for y'all over the next couple of weeks. I'm really excited. We're going to be bringing on Matt Huber very soon. I think probably for like the 25th, the Wednesday of the 25th episode, talking about his new book on class war and climate change that just came out from Verso. Highly suggest people get it. I'm waiting for my physical copy, but I've been able to read some of the ebook version of it, and it's really phenomenal. So hell yeah, I'm really looking forward to all of that. But yeah, let's see. Someone wants to know, unhelpful heap. I'm sure you're a very helpful friend. Said, any thoughts on Sri Lanka? I have to admit, I don't know what's going on. I haven't been keeping up with that. So if you have any info, I'd love to share that with folks, but I don't know off the top of my head. Well, let's see, y'all. I'm going to just give it a second to get maybe a couple questions before we get into this Lula story. But let's see how it goes. Because there's a lot to talk to with Brazil, and we're definitely going to want to get Brian Amir on the show, some of our friends in Brazil, to talk about this upcoming election that I know would make Michael very happy. But I guess if we don't have any questions or anything like that, we can just jump into that story itself, because it might be a good springboard to talk about some other things as well. I mean, I don't think I need to repeat this for too many folks, but Lula, was president of Brazil. He was targeted when he was running against Bolsonaro by the FBI and heavy U.S. involvement. In the now, it's just well known as a legal travesty, Lava Jato, which was a kangaroo court system from the get go. Sergio Moro, the judge behind it, judge and prosecutor behind it, was using this as a kind of political springboard. Um, was really misusing a lot of evidence. Came up with a completely bogus story that Lula had basically been taking money off at the top of Petrobras, the state-owned oil company, and this was supported by the Americans, and they played a very big role in this because going all the way back to when Lula was elected, but especially started to intensify when Obama was president. The United States does not like having a strong leader in Brazil. And Brazil is a very important country globally. It's a growing country, and they did not like having this, power center basically that was challenging, American hegemony. You've seen that almost, recently with the kind of smears against Lula that we've seen regarding his comments on the Russia-Ukraine war. Um, and it's a very triumphant moment. Lula was in prison for over 500 days. Michael ended up visiting him and interviewing him, and an achievement that I think Michael was so proud of. And Lula, it continues to be an incredibly inspiring political figure. If it wasn't just, if it was just him overcoming this political persecution, that would be one thing. But this is somebody who spent their entire life, fighting against the dictatorship in Brazil, fighting for working people, and is somebody who is very, very much rooted in a kind of working class politics in Brazil. And let's play a couple of these videos here because I think they set the stage rather nicely. This is Brian Mears' report here for Telesur. No, sorry. Here we go. Brian Mears reporting for Telesur on the on Lula's announcement that he was running for president. And just for people who it wasn't that this was in question. It's just these are the official kind of pre-steps that happened in a presidential election in Brazil. But enough for me. Let's go to Brian for a moment.
This weekend, a coalition of labor unions, social movements, and left-wing political parties united to launch the candidacy of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva for the Brazilian presidency. In Sao Paulo, our correspondent Brian Meyer reports.
Thousands of working-class social movement and labor union activists gathered in São Paulo on Saturday to participate in the official launching of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's pre-campaign for the Brazilian presidency.
Today we are launching Lula's pre-candidacy. We think he is the only person capable of defeating this anti-democratic project of death that is installed in the federal government today.
The Vamos Juntos pelo Brasil coalition, officially formed on Saturday, is made up of 7 left and center-left political parties, 7 union federations, and dozens of working-class social movements. Together, they have pledged to work to return Lula to the presidency.
We can't stop dreaming and fighting so that this country reflects all of its grandeur, its people and its culture, and definitively end injustice.
At the event, Lula, who was politically imprisoned for 580 days during the last election season on a frivolous conviction that's been reversed by the Supreme Court and ruled unfair by the UN Human Rights Committee, returned to a theme that has dominated his 50-year political career: hunger.
We'll play a little bit more from that in just a moment. But I also wanted to note, I think that the way, Lula, beyond, his achievements and actually, improving the standard of living for working Brazilian people in trying to build up Brazil on its own 2 feet, to not be overly, exposed to American financial interests, is just a damn skilled politician. And I found this quote from his official announcement, I think, to be, to really show those skills well. Lula said, "We want to return to office so that no one ever dares to challenge democracy again, and for fascism to be returned to the sewer of history where it should never have come out." And the coalition that's being built around Lula in this election is very exciting. As Brian noted, it's a coalition of not just the PT, the Workers' Party, but also the Communist Party, PSOL, and other socialist movements in Brazil. And hopefully, this can provide a very strong, united left front here that is able to push back against Bolsonaro's fascism, which is certainly continue to be aided by the United States and financial interests that do not want to see the Workers' Party come into power, back into power in that country. So it's a truly, truly exciting moment. We'll be covering this election as it starts to, push forward. There's been some interesting kind of notes that we've seen. The U.S. CIA apparently had a meeting with Bolsonaro where they told him they won't accept him fudging the numbers or trying to interfere in the election. There's some questions as to how serious America is on that. If they're not trying to, maybe give themselves some plausible deniability, who knows? But from everything that I can see, and this is just me hypothesizing, um, but it does seem that the U.S. is pretty tired of Bolsonaro. Remember that Bolsonaro was, they were happy to accept Bolsonaro, but Bolsonaro was not supposed to be the intended recipient of of the presidency after the United States was clandestinely supporting Lava Jato. They were hoping that the more traditional parties of the right were the ones that were going to come in and take power. So you could see an argument where it's not that the United States is necessarily uninterested in sort of campaigning working against Lula, albeit secretly, but that they might be done with Bolsonaro. I don't know. Might be premature, but that just might be something that's going on because they've gotten a lot that they've wanted. You've seen a lot of the country become privatized. You've seen the kind of financial rewards for those who were interested in the first place in destroying democracy in Brazil and jailing Lula. Those people have been rewarded, and there might be a kind of retreat and a regrouping for another assault on democracy, which is why it's really important that we don't get caught on our back foot again as a left in the United States. Are demanding that there is accountability and punishment for the American role in propping up this clown fascist Bolsonaro, and also supporting this campaign because it's by no stretch of the imagination done. You are seeing people break ranks on the left, and you hope that the larger united front is victorious at the end of the day. But there's still a lot of balls in the air, and it's worth keeping our eye on it. And also, again, domestically, really pushing for there to be some accountability, because I don't know if any of y'all were asked, but I was never particularly interested in the United States working to jail a leader like Lula in Brazil. And I think as Americans, we should be able to, to push and to demand responsibility for those who are acting in our name. So there's going to be a hell of a lot more on that in the near future. And I'll be getting to questions in just 1 second. I just want to play one last clip of Lula, because I think in my, the reason Michael respected Lula so much is because he was somebody who got things done, and the way that he framed things has always been really powerful. This is in Portuguese, but there are subtitles here. This is Lula from Cachuan News, who subtitled and put together this little video. This is from his speech as he was announcing his pre-candidacy for presidency, really hitting on the question of hunger, which I think is extremely powerful in the Brazilian context. And it just shows that Lula understands, that you need to be speaking for the people and also delivering. He has the history of delivering for people. And this is a very powerful legacy, something that's still important in the country. And I think building off of this is very powerful. But let's go.
Não é digno desse título o governante incapaz de verter uma única lágrima diante de seres humanos revirando caminhões de lixo em busca de comida, ou dos mais de 660 mil brasileiros e brasileiras mortos pelo Covid. Pode até se dizer cristão, mas não tem amor ao próximo. Em 2003, quando tomei posse como presidente da República, eu disse que ao final do meu mandato, todos os brasileiros tivessem pelo menos a possibilidade de tomar café da manhã, almoçar e jantar, eu já teria cumprido a missão da minha vida. Travamos contra a fome a maior de todas as batalhas e vencemos. Hoje, sei que é preciso cumprir novamente essa mesma missão. Tudo o que fizemos e o povo brasileiro conquistou está sendo destruído pelo atual governo. O Brasil voltou ao mapa da fome da ONU, de onde havíamos saído em 2014 pela primeira vez na história do Brasil. Somos o terceiro maior produtor mundial de alimentos. Somos o maior produtor de proteína animal do mundo. Produzimos comida em quantidade mais do que suficiente para garantir alimentação de qualidade para todos. No entanto, a fome voltou ao nosso país. Não haverá soberania enquanto 116 milhões de brasileiros sofrerem algum tipo de insegurança alimentar. Enquanto 19 milhões de homens e mulheres e crianças forem dormir todas as noites com fome, sem saber se terão um pedaço de pão para comer no dia seguinte.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that speaks for itself. And as Lula mentioned, and as Leonardo Sattler Casera, I apologize if I mispronounce your name, it says, thanks to Bolsonaro, Brazil is back on the United Nations hunger map, a problem Lula solved. And I mean, I mean, there can be no argument now that the quality of life in Brazil is worse today than when Bolsonaro took office. And I think, Lula making this point here that he makes is very important. That it's not just when he's talking about hunger, right? It's not just a challenge like, oh, everybody needs to come together. We need to overcome some kind of natural phenomenon. No, this is a crisis that is caused by misallocation. That misallocation is caused by capitalism. If Brazil is a country that is producing, it's leading the world in its like meat production, there's no reason that people in the country should be going hungry. And it reminds folks these kind of crises, these especially famine, are purely capitalist creations. Going all the way back to the Irish potato famine. During that period of time, they were exporting food from Ireland to sell in English markets. Unbelievable. But that's what happens when you have a for-profit system. It creates these kind of irrationalities that are not necessarily tied to the actual, physical reality of how much food is actually being produced in the country. It's all about who is getting that food and for what purpose. And if you're just running a pure market-based system, that means that people will go hungry despite there being plenty to eat. And I think Lula hitting that, that point in the way that he does is extremely powerful, and truly important. I'm really excited to see what happens. When Lula does come back into office. I know after Michael met with him, he was saying, ironically and joking, of course, but like, there was something to the fact that because Lula was imprisoned, he was spending a lot of time reading and thinking. That Michael was always saying that, like, this could actually, bolster him in a certain way. Obviously, you'd want to avoid the trial and all that kind of stuff. It's a little tongue in cheek, but like the point is that Lula has had plenty of time to think about different strategies for sort of dealing with entrenched capital power within Brazil and building a movement that is not only going to right the wrongs of Bolsonaro, but to continue to build off of the success that he had when he was leader of the country and PT was in power. So I have to say I'm incredibly optimistic about the future there, and I'm hoping for much more good news in the near future. But yeah, let's see. I'll get to some questions now, y'all. If that sounds good, so drop those in the chat, and I can answer some of these. Oh yeah, before we go off of Brazil, Leonardo is also noting Bolsonaro is agitating militaries to play. I don't think there's any doubt that Bolsonaro, in the same way that Trump wanted there to be a kind of military coup after his loss, I have no doubt that Bolsonaro will be interested in trying something like that, and it's worth being, paying attention to it. The question will be: does Bolsonaro have the organization, the ability to successfully pull something off like that? I wonder. I mean, we've seen all that we need to see about how a right wing and anti democratic the military in Brazil can be. So I won't say that all bets are off there. And it is something to be take very seriously. But we have Ron here who says, in light of the composition of the Supreme Court after Roe, what's next? Well, I mean, there's a lot of different solutions that I think are in front of us. I've obviously talked a lot about that on the show. If you didn't see, and we spent half an hour breaking down the history of the court, how we got into this moment. But yeah, let's talk about solutions. I think the first thing for people who are watching this program and people who consider themselves to be socialists is starting to take very seriously the challenge that the court poses to all of our programs. I'm not even talking about under the current condition of the court. I'm talking about go all the way back to 16, all the way back to 2020. Do you think that the same kind of squeamish court that basically struck down Obama's, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, which was effectively a big handout to insurance companies, they were still striking down aspects of that. Do you think that they wouldn't be doing the same kind of thing with Medicare for all, right? With the Green New Deal, um, with a lot of these kind of, again, important but middle of the road kind of social democratic policies that we support, the Supreme Court was already prepared and was already, was going to try to overrule those things. So I think that more than ever, I think having a strong critique of the court and understanding that that is a political institution, it is a political institution, not an apolitical institution like a lot of liberals try to make it out to be, despite the fact that they've been shown at every turn in their life that the court is extremely politicized. That is something that we need to struggle against. And let's talk about some of the ways that we could do that. First, in a context, for example, of Bernie Sanders' presidency, if that were to happen, I think that there's a lot of historical precedent that you can look at, particularly what happened with the radical Republicans under Lincoln. Do you think that the Supreme Court at that period of time was all down for freeing the slaves? Do you think that the people who had been sitting on the court for years and years and years, when human bondage was the law of the land in this country, were just going to let that go? No, they tried to stop Lincoln and the radical Republicans from ending slavery in this country. And you know what they did? The radical Republicans in Lincoln, they said, thank you very much for the legal advice, Supreme Court. We'll take that into consideration. And they did it anyway. The point being that the enforcement mechanisms of the court are purely political. And, it doesn't mean that they could easily be overtaken, but they can be. And this kind of, you have to sort of break your brain out of the kind of prison that we're sort of grown up with in this country, that the Supreme Court is the end all be all, and challenging it is inherently anti-American. I think one of the best presidents that we've ever had in this country, Lincoln, showed that that's not the case. Secondly, immediately, what can we do? I mean, I know a lot of people like packing the court. I don't find packing the court to necessarily be a solution in the long term, just in the sense that I think that what really needs to happen is we should be pushing back against the Supreme Court's ability to basically sit on top of society and rule over society. That power just needs to be directly challenged. Now, could packing the court play a role in that? Potentially, especially if it means that people's sort of holy opinion of the Supreme Court's changed. That could be helpful in dismantling its power. But I do think that we should be a little bit more direct than that, because, we don't want to just create a situation where it's like, oh, well, they put on 3 more people or whatever. And now we're just saying, let it play out. We accept this power again. We should never be in a situation in this country, in a country that has had a democracy and a system for this long, where we have this group of unelected elders who are able to put their power over the legislature, in particular. I think that the larger project of like democratic reform needs to be coupled too with the critique of executive power at large, and we need to be trying to push and argue for a democracy in the sense that the legislature is the center of power in the American government. Despite these, in spite of these kind of systems that were set up to limit and dilute democracy in favor of the rich, we should be, arguing for a system that is much more reflective of us as a people, where political questions are open to public influence. I mean, just look at how insane it is right now that you're seeing the Democratic Party and Washington Post and all these different organizations cower in fear at the idea that people are protesting, a group of unelected officials who are right now aiming to strip away basic human rights from women in this country. Absolutely insane. that's your reaction to this. We've seen, the Democrats slow jog in response, to the threats from the court. And the thing that they're moving so quickly to do is to protect the court's legitimacy, um, and to remind the people in the court that they're with them 100%, despite what the people are saying. I mean, that's an absolute joke, as a system. And I think that this is a protracted struggle to win that. But truly, I just don't see much use in sitting around and trying to come up with particular reforms that would reset the court in people's minds. This should be a very clear example for people that this judicial power is dangerous, for democracy, and we should take that challenge seriously. I always, Bernie always had a plan that I like too, that he believed that you could reshuffle judges to lower courts. I think, again, that's very viable and is worthwhile pursuing. But again, the gold standard, what we have to do is we have to limit the court's power, to basically be able to sit over society. Obviously, you need a court system and you need a high court of appeals. But you don't need a system like we have here, where the Supreme Court is basically able to sit above all other power, in this country, especially if it's going to be, the situation as it is now, where those people effectively are appointed for life. Again, um, feel free to jump in with any questions here. Garrett says, food, water, shelter. What year is it? I mean, this is 2022, global capitalism. That's the system that we're living in. Dakota wants to know, do you speak any other languages, and what's the language that you'd like to learn? I was in French immersion in Canada from K through 12, but Spanish and Portuguese are definitely on my list. I speak a little bit of mangled Texas Spanish, but it's something that I have been wanting to, spend some more time on, really becoming more fluent in. So that's definitely on the bucket list. I'll tell you, when I went to Spain recently, if my vocabulary wasn't enough of a problem, I think them trying to catch my accent was very difficult. So definitely would be happy to work on that, especially because, I know there's some people doing really great English language stuff, it, you know, um, in Mexico and in South America at large. But so much of it is in Spanish, and understandably so. That for us, relying on secondhand accounts or sort of not sloppy journalism, Google translations and stuff always makes me nervous. And I can read a little bit, but I'm always worried that I'm going to misunderstand something gravely. So I usually have to get somebody to check it for me. So that's something we want to do. My plan in the next 6 months is to really spend some time on that. Well, Ron here says unregulated markets produce prosperity and food security for all. I mean, point me to place. I mean, even in the U.S., we don't have that kind of system. And Jeffrey Canny says food's been exported from famine-stricken countries quite often. See how the other half dies for documentation of this. I mean, yeah, no doubt. I mean, because why wouldn't it? I mean, if you have a system that's set up for profit, people who want return on their investments in that system, of course, you're going to have that kind of system of uneven distribution of production. And I think that what we should be, that's like when you're first becoming a socialist. I think a very, very motivating and important point. And I think that, just because it sort of seems common sense to us, maybe, just if you spend enough time thinking about, socialism and critiquing capitalism, sometimes those headline things that are just so motivating and shocking when you really start to realize them, you don't rely on them as much as you should. And this is like a self critique more than anything. Um, And our friend E Vegetable says the thing about exporting food while being hungry reminds me of Thomas Sankara. 100%. I mean, and that's why his programs of domestic food production were so powerful. Going to Brazil too. Jules says Marielle Franco's death is still unsolved, though everyone's aware of the police officer who was responsible. I know, and I mean that was one of the scariest things that we've seen in a long while. And Marielle was such a force in Brazil. If people aren't familiar, Marielle Franco was a politician in Brazil who was murdered, absolutely brutally, while Lula was imprisoned, and it only showed just how dark and frightening the Bolsonaro regime was, and the fact that it still hasn't been, there still hasn't been real punishment for that. I think only shows how serious that shit was. So this is a Sri Lanka update. I haven't read much up on this, so I can't comment on it. But Daizon says, in other international news, Sri Lanka's prime minister resigned amid protests over economic crisis, food shortage, and corruption. So keep that on the agenda, y'all. Victor from the Twitch chat says, I'm not one to watch everything through the lens of one world event, but I saw Lula's take on Ukraine and Russia saying they share blame for this. I find that a bad take. Then again, I did not read or hear the entire interview. Um, well, what Lula said there was that there were a lot of off ramps for peace, and that if he would have been, in a position of power, he would have been advocating for peace in a way that the Biden administration didn't and still hasn't. To this day, when you're allocating, when you're right, like looking, like Lula is there looking at the reasons as to how this conflict got to the place that it is, and I think that he is right to sit here and say that there were a lot of different options on the table. Of course, Russia pulled the psycho move at the end of the day, and like just saying that there are things that we should be aware of, and that there were off ramps beforehand doesn't excuse or support Russia ending up taking the most insane, anti-human, destructive path possible, which is what they did. But Lula, I think, would have been a very, very positive force in the in the days before the invasion, in a way that the Biden administration certainly wasn't. So I don't know. I wouldn't be too worked up about Lula, thinking that like he's not somebody who takes these things seriously. Lula has been a peace advocate throughout his political career, and I think is showing what a position coming from places outside of sort of Western Europe and the United States is on this crisis. And I don't know. I think that is a very important voice for sure. And I'm sorry, I don't know much about this one either. But any thoughts on the Filipino election and the failure of its center left in crushing loss to Marcos? Sorry, I haven't kept up with the Philippines either, my friend. But I always appreciate when y'all send us stuff. Um, how do we limit SCOTUS power? Well, there's a few different ways. I think the easiest and the most direct way is to do, for example, what Lincoln and the Radical Republicans did, which is basically take it as legal advice and continue to operate the state as you were. Um, I would also basically start putting up political and public pressure on the court, and starting to draw the line, saying that like this movement doesn't recognize the power of the court to basically be able to overrule Congress. Remember, that was a power that was taken. That's not something that's spelled out in the Constitution or anything like that. That is a power that the Supreme Court asserted for itself early on in the history of the U.S. Right, that was an asserted power, and the only way to push back against an asserted power, because it's not written down anywhere, is to challenge that assertion. And you have to lay out a lot of political groundwork to be able to do that. But I think that that's absolutely crucial if we want to have any kind of movement that's able to overcome the power and the certain kind of mind trap a lot of people are in when it comes to the Supreme Court. Our friend at SRD Law says, "What are you drinking?" I'm drinking the Pride of Texas Shiner Bock beer. Ain't nothing finer than a Shiner. Hmm. I don't follow this one. I'm sorry. Sunes is that what Bush speaks? I don't know. Oh, I think they're talking about my Spanish, probably. Um, Strom says favorite bourgeois liberal revolutionary. Well, I wouldn't want to make anyone too offended, but I think the easy answer would be Thomas Paine, right? Um, I mean, I guess you can make an argument that he wasn't necessarily a liberal. I think what he was building was probably the best promise of the American kind of revolutionary tradition. Um, but that, I mean, that would probably be the guy, right? I'm trying to think. I might come back to you, Strong. MDR says I've been called a Russian bot in online debates, but all I can say is niet. Kristen Park says, "Tell us, sir, English is a great introduction to Southern country politics." Jules also notes that Tunisia went up in flames in 2011 due to food prices, and unfortunately, the food crisis is only going to get worse as you start to see the knockdown effects of lack of production in Ukraine, which provides a hell of a lot of food for both Europe and the world. There will be very serious consequences from this, and the United States needs to play a big role in trying to alleviate that crisis for sure. Why is it that so few of our financial measurements account for present and future externalities costs? Thinking the idea of a carbon tax is repulsive to so many, but the costs of inaction are worse. Well, I think there's two questions here. I think that there's definitely a role to play in considering future costs and things. I mean, I've been writing a little bit about oil and gas here in Texas, and one thing that I think a lot of people aren't considering is the massive cost that goes along with plugging up oil wells. This is an argument for keeping them flowing, but it costs a hell of a lot of money to plug up these wells, and all across Texas right now, particularly after the kind of crisis in gas production. You saw a lot of wells get abandoned, and what ends up happening is a lot of because so many different the companies are always changing and restructuring and filing for bankruptcy. You basically have wells that have no owner, and by law you're supposed to plug when you're done. But if you're bankrupt and no one knows where you are, who really even owns it, they just get left out. Conservative estimate from the Texas Railroad Commission is like there's around 7,000 wells unplugged right now, probably more. And what ends up happening is you have methane releasing into the atmosphere, which is a hyper greenhouse gas, and then you have oil leaking into the groundwater, right? And then what ends up happening is the state and the communities have to end up paying up for it, and the cost to doing all that just on what we have right now is astronomical. To really scale down production here is going to cost even more money. Again, this is an argument not to do it, but these are costs that are associated. And of course, not as big as the cost as continuing to burn fossil fuels at the rate that we are right now. To the second question, I mean, the problem with carbon tax is that it often is it uses a financial mechanism, to try to solve this problem, and it doesn't necessarily equate, to a lack of a lowering of greenhouse gases. It just sort of increases, prices a bit. And two, these things end up having knockdown effects for everyday people, where the consumers are the ones who are ending up paying for those kind of taxes. And if you have a system like we do in the United States right now, where you don't have a lot of other options other than relying on fossil fuels to move and to get around, it's wrong to end up putting that burden on the general consumer. What we should be doing is taking a much more active role as the U.S. government in directing investment and taking away that power from private corporations. There's something like $4 trillion right now invested in fossil fuel production. There is no way in hell those people are going to accept a lack of return on those investments. They will take a lot of hits, but they want returns on that. And the power to invest is the power to direct movement and production and shifts in the system. And as long as that's a private power, we will never come closer to dealing with climate change. The problem with carbon, tax and a lot of those other kind of, marginal movements there, marginal in the sense of like they're not looking at a grand like reshuffling of this system. Is it, just it continues to keep the engine of this system, right, which is private capital, in power. And as long as that's the case, as long as those people who are heavily invested in these systems are the ones who are directing investment and control, and maintain control over those systems, we'll never get the kind of changes that we sort of want. So I would say, sure, thinking about externalities and costs is important, but I would direct those much more at questions as to why we need mass, large, beautiful TVA style public power in this country, why we need to invest more in nuclear, rather than pushing for stuff like a carbon tax. Um, some kid from a place. I think your name's great. Let me see. I think this is for somebody else. Um, Hey, Gris. It's good to hear from you, friend. Infinite content here. With the drama with Ukraine about to affect oil and wheat markets, do you see Latin America able to rise in prominence? Brazil is a major agricultural producer, and Venezuela has oil. In terms of Venezuela, I mean, we're already seeing that the U.S. government is interested, in sort of softening some of the restrictions on their production. The tension with Venezuela and oil production in general is that it takes a lot of investment and time actually to ramp those things up. But there certainly has been an opening for Venezuela to be able to get some much needed capital into that society, um, you know, and sort of circumvent the long economic isolation that the United States has put up on it. Brazil, I mean, you're definitely going to want to see um, much more. You're going to need to see Lula in power to basically be able to see that be beneficial for everyday people. Because as we're already seeing, the problem with agricultural production in Brazil is that it's not really servicing people in Brazil. It's going out as cash crop to the international market, and that's a huge problem, right? So, um, there's potential there, but it's not a sure thing, right? You have to have planning and a political willingness to be able to deal with that. And unfortunately, mix that in what's going on in Ukraine, um, with a crisis in American agriculture right now, too, which it actually spells for fairly worrying next couple of years. Um, And Pedro has a question for everybody. I'll be reading in Philippines soon. Any recommendations, everybody? If you have any, you send them here, and I'll put them up too. Um, I think this is about the Philippines. Yes, this is from our friend MDR. There was a working class labor leader candidate in Philippines named Ledoy de Guzman, but he was mostly ignored. The Philippines is still stuck in the red versus yellow mindset. And our good friend SRD was sure to recognize the shiner. Also got a cool little koozie here, right? Charlie Crockett, son of Davy. I don't know. Snagged it from a bar recently. I'm a big fan. And MDR, just so if people know what he means, knows red equals Marcos family, yellow equals anyone who criticizes the Marcoses. And our friend Beer Chat here, SRD says, I'm more of a St. Arnold's guy. I love St. Arnold's. St. Arnold's is good as hell. Hoping I might be able to get some. Hopefully this week I might be going to Houston. Strom says Thomas Paine was a hero. Absolutely. And definitely, if you haven't, read Harvey Kay's book on Thomas Paine. I have this one on my desk because I've been reading some old Paine stuff recently with Peter Limbaugh, who wrote the introduction to this verso edition of Thomas Paine's writing. Peter Limbaugh, if you're not familiar, was a former Left Reckoning guest, along with much more impressive things as well. An incredible historian. Definitely check out that interview if you haven't seen it already. Peter Limbaugh is definitely one of the greats out there. And more updates on Philippines from MDR says, sad things about the Philippine elections, candidates who aren't popular are quickly labeled as nuisance candidates, media frames, and limits the options for people. Personal question, but Nick says, do you have student debt? And I said, I'm like the rest of y'all. I have a shitload of it. And working my way through school didn't help much either. I mean, that was crazy. That was like, I grew up pretty poor. So I always had a pretty, strong, like, not class analysis in terms of politics, but you could sort of tell who was who, right? Nothing clearer for me than when I was like at school and, bartending. I'd get out at like 4 and I bartend till 2 in the morning, get up in the morning for my 8 a.m. classes, constantly having to make decisions like, oh, this is a bullshit assignment. I don't think I can finish this. Like having to like actually decide what things I was able to complete in the week, to the crisis of to the cost of either income in my pocket, or saying, okay, I can take this 5% hit on my grade by not doing this, because I need to go to work today or whatever. Nothing more like clearing than that as to the vastly different lives that people live in this country, than seeing other people who never had to worry about that. Not that I would wish that on them, just radically, radically different experiences. Pedro says, Brazilian watcher here, been watching since TMBS. This year's election expectation is simply vile. Beyond fake news, some violence is more than expected. Sad Lula's bodyguard had to show a gun to keep. Oh, there might be a little bit more there. I'll keep my eye out. To keep him safe. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly scary. And there's no doubt about it that it's definitely going to be worrying to watch over the next few months. But I'm hoping that there's enough of a united front around Lula that not only is able to get him victory, but also make any kind of shenanigans too unpopular or unlikely to work that they won't try him. Ted says their friends in the Philippines are very depressed and they're thinking about leaving. Sorry, it's sad. I wish I knew more. Nick says, is it carbon tax versus inaction? I think that would be a bad framing, as there are other things to do. I mean, there's a lot of other things that we can do. There could be some role for a carbon tax, but I think that this, as like the fixation, I think it's a very, very limited horizon. I'm sorry, y'all. The playbook is the same as it's always been. It really is Green New Deal or bust. I'm working on a piece. I'm hoping it will come out soon, about what's happening here in Texas. But I'll lay out some of the arguments here. Is that we're seeing what what our climate future is looking like under neoliberal capitalism. Small kind of boutique decentralized grids, that are designed to actually take away money from public power, right? Because that's the way that it's set up right now through tax credits, is to basically let people opt out of a kind of public larger system. And we need big, public democratically controlled, power in this country. Just like there's no way about it, other way about it, because what's looking like is going to happen is there'll be nice, clean, private options for the rich so that they can continue to power their homes, and dirty, failing electrical grids for the rest of us. That's very much what we're looking at. And I think, we can't concede the power, over our the way, the decision power, the decision making ability, to private capitalists, whether they be, oil capitalists or green capitalists, frankly. And what we need to be doing is building up a much stronger, push for public power, for just transition, and for a Green New Deal, because they are building an alternative, to this current model. But it won't be one that's necessarily cleaner. It won't be. It certainly won't be one that is more just. It will be one that is tiered. And as somebody in a country where so much of our kind of public goods have been privatized and decentralized, socials should be very worried about these trends. So yeah, I mean, there's a hell of a lot that can be done. I think the over attachment to carbon tax, I think, is not particularly helpful. Infinite content also knows methane. Methane has a greenhouse effect 20 times greater than carbon dioxide. Yeah, which is why it's so devastating that these leaking wells are, just shooting that up into the atmosphere because fossil fuel companies can't be bothered to clean up their mess after they've profited from it. Yeah, Tsune says it'll be carbon rationing. Our friend up in I mean, a lot of people work in the oil industry, and these are people who should be natural allies of a socialist movement. And I think, especially in the context of what's happening in Texas, when like ExxonMobil, for example, has been waging real campaigns to try to decertify unions here. There's a lot of fights that we should be more involved with to sort of stand with people who are working in this industry because the executives are going to be fine. All that you saw during the COVID crisis was exactly what our future is going to look like, right? Executives for the oil and gas industry got golden parachutes from the state and from finance capital. They were fine. They were taken care of. And around 100,000 people, the people who work the rigs, who do the real work, were just let go, thrown to the side. Um, and that's what's coming, and that will be devastating. And you got to show up if you believe in a just transition like I do. We got to be showing up now, not just promoting these ideas, but actually showing up in the fights that are happening all around folks. Because a slogan's nice, but if people don't believe that you're serious, you're promising people a world, and you got to start showing them that you can produce. It's daunting. It's a big task, but it's a necessary one. Our friend in Canada, a loose leaf, says here in Alberta they call abandoned wells an untapped new industry, but it's just getting the public to pay to clean up the mess of private interest. I think that's exactly it. I mean, the way I like to phrase it is like the boom is privatized, the bust is socialized, right? That's the oil and gas motto at this point. Um, Democles says, where is the United States agricultural policy going in face of worldwide hunger? Hunger is often the impetus for revolution or war. Well, the problem right now is that you have, questions of, producing things like for ethanol, so things that aren't even for food consumption. The United States produces a hell of a lot of soy and corn, and it's like, okay, well, where exactly is that going? And the United States continues to be a massive exporter of food globally. But there needs to be subsidies, particularly for countries that we're sort of throwing into the midst of crisis. Um, but it hasn't been that impressive. I know Ilhan Omar has been pushing for the United States to do more to address hunger in the immediate future, but it hasn't been too impressive yet from the U.S. government. Ilhan's great. Um, yeah, we'll see what the State Department says about the Philippines. Have you ever thought to chat with Derek Varn? I'd be happy to. I don't know Varn very well, but I know he's friendly with a lot of our friends, so I'd be happy to. Um, but I'm not too. We know each other, but I don't know him well. Um, I don't think this is true. They say a carbon tax and dividend is the most efficient, equitable means. No, you're still relying on market logic, which will only like if you're worried about cost and benefit analysis, we need to be talking much bolder than trying to come up with a nice tax scheme and a market for pollution. I'm sorry that window has sailed, and that sailed a long time ago. We need to be taking production into public control of both power and of our natural resources. You can't play this game with these people anymore because they are setting themselves up to be an entrenched power source going on, even if we start getting 40% of our electricity from renewables or whatever. Those industries have every interest in staying afloat, and they will continue to pollute and to damage the world. Don't play this game of believing that market-based solutions are any kind of first step in any kind of serious, socialist, worker-centered, people-centered environmental policy. Dakota said, speaking of carbon tax, have you already read Matt Huber's new book? I'm looking forward to getting into it. I have been reading. I've been reading it a bit. I haven't finished it yet, but we're going to be having him on the show at the end of the month. So we'll talk more about this pretty soon. Um, about Canada too. We got they're ready to release this is from Loose Leaf again. They're ready to release the tailing ponds in the water supply as clean as it will get without the affecting the profits of these companies. I mean, these are the kind of grim games that these people play. We got an endorsement for Varn here from Sune. Says Varn would be a good fit for David. Nice. This is a good point too. Bigata says military and industry eat up the lion's share of fuel. Our individual use is minor comparison. No, I mean, going back to Matt Huber makes these points a lot that like, this kind of individualized model for how we're going to deal with climate change is complete bogus. We need to like recognize that yes, it is a few companies that are are vastly responsible for carbon emissions, right? And then you get like, well, actually, this is like your favorite thing from the Vox people, like, well, they don't just do it in a vacuum. They create products and services that people want, and they use them, and that's what creates carbon. So it is an individual problem. No, people have to live in the society that they're in, right? I don't have very many options when it comes to getting around in my community, to buying food, to going to meet people, to going to work, all of that, other than using my own personal private vehicle, right? Because America's infrastructure is built up in a certain way to privilege and to support that kind of use, right? Those are decisions that are made by private corporations. And then they use their influence in politics to maintain the kind of conditions that are necessary for for them to pursue the profit. The investment decisions that are made by Exxon, the investment decisions that are made by Delta, are decisions that are governed by one, a for-profit model, and two, are made privately. Those are decisions that seriously affect all of us and seriously affect the world. And if you want to start dealing with those levels of emissions, you have to start dealing with that power. And all that the kind of liberal environmental movement has been pushing for a long time has been this kind of individual personal nonsense. And we need to be moving more in a way that is making decisions, as treating decisions that affect us all as decisions that we will be dealing with democratically and as a society. There really is no way to reform that system until you start to take that power seriously, because ExxonMobil and Shell and all of them are getting into renewables, and they want them to be developed in a certain way that maintains their capacity and the need for natural gas in particular, and coal, and oil. Right? If you can create a situation where we always need to have a good flowing, you know, dirty power plant, to make sure that we can cover ourselves in cases like intermittency of like wind and solar. That's a lock-in situation for Shell and for Exxon, right? Because it means they will always be in business no matter how much our kind of consumer demand changes. We need to be in control of that investment, not allowing private capitals to be in control of that investment. And it's just, yeah. So, I mean, your point there, talking about the military, I mean, they exclude the military for most of these studies. And they exclude capital at large for its role and responsibility here. Lanzetta says, "What's up, Big Dave? Salam. Do you think Texas will be the last state to legalize recreational cannabis? I'm not sure they do it even within the next 20 years. Thoughts? Am I being pessimistic? I think it'll happen sooner than that. They'll be slow as hell. And there's no doubt that there's a lot of people who are pushing it. It's very popular. I mean, the Democrats here and people ground game Texas who just ran a successful campaign here in Austin, to decriminalize marijuana and ban no-knock warrants, which is a huge victory, very important. Have said that weed legalization is a winning policy in Texas, and there's no doubt about it amongst the people. And certainly as that industry continues to grow, people are going to want to get their hands in that shit. I don't think that that's impossible. I think the slowest moving aspect of this, frankly, is like the dysfunction of the Texas legislature. Remember, it's like, I believe in the country, the Texas legislature meets the least, right? So it's a deliberative body that doesn't really have a lot of time to even get through all of the super, super nasty Republican shit that they want to every 2 years. So I think that slows, may slow down the process, but I don't think 20 years. I think it will happen sooner than you expect. Especially, I mean, especially like Oklahoma, Louisiana, New Mexico. I mean, there's going to start to get a point where it's ridiculous and Texans aren't going to want to be left out of the money making opportunity. Not the most just way for those things to happen, but that's how it's working. Hmm. I don't know about this. I'm surprised I don't know about this. Do you have a take on the Texas National Guard unionizing? Haven't had a chance to read the article in Jacobin yet. I have not seen this. But what I can talk about are what's going on right now at the border, because for people who aren't from here, they might not know that Abbott using COVID-19, and by the way, a little personal plug, I have a piece coming out in Sublation magazine tomorrow morning on Greg Abbott and how he's used COVID-19 to increase his personal and political power. But Abbott, mobilized the National Guard along with state troopers to the border using COVID-19 as a pretense for it, which is complete bullshit. And they're doing this operation called Operation Lone Star, which has just been a fucking gold mine uh, bonanza for unregulated capital going into the hands of private contractors. But they've also had National Guardsmen on the border for months now. And for people who aren't familiar with how that works, these are people who hold civilian jobs as well, in addition to their National Guard responsibilities. And they're typically not pulled up for this amount of time. And because they're pulled up by the state and not by the federal government, they get paid less. They don't have access to the federal health care. And if they get killed in duty, they only get workers' comp, which is 70, which is like a very small portion of their salary that's sent to them, and they have to file paperwork and all of this kind of red tape. I mean, imagine what that's like for a grieving family. Compare that to the U.S. Government system. If you're called up by the U.S. government, by federal government, you get paid $100,000. If the family gets paid $100,000 immediately if somebody's killed in action, and like these are serious questions. Just a couple weeks ago, a young National Guardsman died jumping into the Rio Grande trying to save a migrant family who was crossing. Died, drowned to death, and now their family is being put through hell. Trying to navigate a completely dysfunctional workers' comp system. Uh, um, um, National Guardsmen, they don't have access to that good healthcare, and they're also, because remember they have personal jobs in the civilian world, they're losing their jobs at home, and they're making less, which is a horrible, horrible burden on them and their families. And I mean, I think this should be a much bigger scandal than it already has been. And trigger warning for folks about this, but there's been a huge rise in suicides amongst National Guardsmen who have been at the border for months on end because they're seeing their life at home fall apart financially, all to play a bullshit stunt for Greg Abbott to try to terrorize people at the border, and very unsuccessful even by the own metrics of what Abbott wants to do. So I don't know about this campaign here, J Rex, but I could say that there's a lot going on right there. Yeah, well, that won't fly with me. um, Our friend says, super insightful. Thanks, brother. Makes sense that carbon tax doesn't solve for root issues and disproportionately affects working people. Appreciate your perspective as always. Appreciate you too. Sorry. I hope whenever I answer these questions, I hope no one thinks I'm getting heated at them. I just get heated when I think about some of these things. From Facebook, we don't usually get things from Facebook. But Richard has a complaint here. Says, Lula's take on Ukraine was not good. I was how to say, focusing on the U.S., NATO, and Ukraine, saying they had off ramps is like focusing on Saddam Hussein, saying the Iraq War was partly his fault. As horrible as Saddam was, that's just the wrong framing as is. Well, I don't agree with you. I think that playing the game that they were playing going into this was extremely dangerous. Of course, we can be putting the blame on the psycho in the situation, which is Russia and Putin. There's no doubt about it. There's one country who invaded another country. There's no questions there. But I'm sorry. At the same time, planning and trying to push NATO, knowing what that was going to create into this situation, that was only going to accelerate and aggravate the situation. there is plenty of context that is reasonable for people to be able to swim through and understand. And Lula making that point, I think, is completely valid. But God, I might be a little bit behind y'all. I definitely am behind y'all. Sorry. I read recently that the U.S. is looking for rapprochement with Venezuela for oil purchasing. Yeah, we've been seeing that. I'm going to try to go a little bit quickly just so I can make sure I'm not losing everybody, or I'm not too far behind y'all. Prairie Kowalski says too on Brazil. Brazil is highly dependent on foreign fertilizers, so they won't benefit at all from this crisis. Thank you. Okay. Appreciate all that. I'm sorry I'm not gonna be able to get to everybody, but I'm gonna try to at least get to the most recent ones just so we can. Thanks so much, MDR, for the chat. I always love the text description of these. I'll just let this stand for itself. I'm not familiar with this, but I appreciate the super chat, Michael. Michael says Lee Smolin, Time Reborn, has an epilogue that points out physics overlap with economics and climate change action via time and relationship. I'd love to see y'all snag him for an interview. Interesting. I'm not sure if I follow all that, but I appreciate the chat. I'll look into it. Kowalski also knows, saying, thanks for the chat too, says food crisis won't hit USA or Western Hemisphere. Moore says, I have some people in mind that I think would be great guests for LR. Are we allowed to? Of course you're allowed anytime. Send them here or send them to our Twitter or email, which is Left Reckoning Gmail. Always appreciate hearing suggestions from folks. I don't think this was directed to me. I did not see this. Did you guys talk about the Bernie Daily Beast article yet today, talking about Facebook's manipulation of his page and profile? I've not seen this. Doesn't surprise me, though. SRD Law says any coverage of Texas 28. Benavides endorsed Cisneros today or yesterday, I heard. Yeah, I mean, we've done a few segments on Cisneros and Cuellar in the past. You can check those out. Know a little bit more deep dives than what I can give you now. I mean, it's interesting to see the Democratic Party still sort of standing with Cuellar against Cisneros. I think Cisneros sort of represents a very good kind of progressive politics. I think it's going to be close. I can't tell you which way it will play. It'll be interesting to see how people who are understandably worried about the Roe v. Wade leak decision end up voting in this primary, and I hope that they vote for Cisneros. But I mean, Cuellar, I'll just say this again: like there is nobody who could be further away from like the actual life of people in that part of Texas than Cuellar. This is somebody who's getting investigated for his relationships with the government of Azerbaijan. I'm all for internationalism, y'all, but I just don't think that too many people in that part of the country can say the same about themselves, having these kind of very strange, seedy dealings with Azerbaijan. Ron says, fossil fuel profits are privatized, the wars and pollution a public expense. I think that's true. Okay, let's see. I can maybe take one or two more. I'm trying to get at least to the ball, make sure if there's any new people get in. Cameron, is Lula back? Lula's back, baby. I have a conspiracy theory that the Texas Ledge has a backroom deal with all of the surrounding states to not legalize weed so that their neighboring states can continue to make money on Texas weed tourism. That's a conspiracy, all right. These boys, all they want is money, man. The second you make it clear to them. This is so yeah, so true. John Boehner sent so many people of color to prison and poor people for one blunt, then turned around and is all making money. Just effing capitalist quote. I mean, that's the game. We can shout out Doug Lane. I think we might try to get Doug on the show soon too. It'd be fun. Serious question: how many holes does a straw have? I don't know. I'm no philosopher, but one. All right, let's see. Always appreciate y'all. All right. Appreciate you, Davos Scumwad. From Mozambique to my siblings in Brazil. Appreciate you too. All right, y'all. I think that might be the place to end it. I always appreciate chatting with y'all. Join us tomorrow. I mean, we got lots to celebrate. This union move in Denver and Starbucks was successful, unanimous, which is huge. We'll be joined by Nick Boland to sort of break down the campaign that ended up being victorious there, and have a hell of a lot more for y'all. More bonus stuff coming up for patrons. Please consider supporting us at patreon.com/leftreckoning so I can get some Spanish lessons. And take care, all of y'all. I'll see y'all tomorrow, 7 Central.